as you just heard, the Happy Hour Lifestyle Show, coming to you once again high atop the 48th floor, overlooking beautiful Midwest of Northern Illinois and Southern Wisconsin. We're hiding behind the Cheddar Curtain. And we know that no football games will be lost in Wisconsin or Illinois this week. It's one of the few weeks during the year, the calendar, before the pros go back into practice. I heard that. I'm going down this bent. Sitting with me, a beautiful guy from California, Robert Mills. How you doing, Robert?
Great, Randy. Always thrilled to be with you here.
Yeah. Well, just so you know, Super Bowl was what, 10 days ago, something like
Yeah.
that?
Yes.
Well, they go back into practice about July 13th. So you don't have that big a gap in your life, if being that, the football fan that you are, we hate to have people crying. The reason I say that, I went in to get my haircut yesterday at a place. I'll give them kudos. It was Sport Clips, and they have TVs going all the time. So I sit there getting my haircut, and what am I watching? A 2-hour show on the NFL. All the really serious people. Changes being made. Trades here, trades there. What quarterback's going to go play whatever? But right now we're sitting in the cold tundra of the Midwest, and you're sitting in the beautiful palace of your hideout in California.
That's right. I'm in San Rafael, California. I can see the Golden Gate Bridge from my backyard.
Well, yeah,
Downtown.
as long as you don't get called into painting it, everything's good.
Yes.
Anyway, how's everything going on in your life? I know we have some topics we're going to cover today. We talked about in our last show, but we're going to get you pumping your knowledge. I asked last week on our show, by the way, for everybody listening, if you want to find this show, don't forget, you now can go to Live Eco Style. And just to let you know what that looks like, just for a minute, how to get there, I'm going to share our screen here. And well, I did a really bad job of doing that. We'll get rid of this. But this is what it looks like on Live Eco Style. And all you have to do is go to liveecostyle.com. You have this beautiful man standing there. We had a show we did called Coffee and Tidbits, but all of our shows are now lined up. If you go to Live Eco Style, it's real simple. You go up at the top, and over here it just says Excited Minds Media TV, Happy Hour Lifestyle Show. Happy Hour Lifestyle Show actually goes directly to last week's show, which is you're seeing here, and you can play that and that'll be featured. But if you want to get all our shows from all our contributors, you go to Excited Minds Media. And again, what that does is it brings in everything that we have that actually are now on our 2 Roku channels. This will be the same as there, but you can come to our website to get this. But this looks exactly like our Roku channels. One is called Live Eco Style. The other one is called Excited Minds Media. But all of these are active shows that we've done over the years. Got music, fashion and spas, our contributors from Canada talking remarkable stories that they come up. And then Live Eco Style is a real conglomeration of a whole bunch of things we've done, and then new releases. And every once a week, Robert and I get together to share topical stories from around the world. And the only reason is that Robert has been around the world. So we I just ride him like the show pony he is, asking him to tell us our stories. So anyway, this list that you gave us, I asked him to give us places that we might talk about. Which ones have you elected, Robert, to talk about this week?
Well, I want to talk about Bhutan a little bit, maybe Bolivia, Denmark, Namibia, and maybe a little bit about Patagonia or Alaska. We can touch on a couple of those.
Yeah, we have 1 hour show. I know it's going to be so.
This only take 3 or 4 hours, Randy. It's
well, okay. Here's what the scenario is. We love our listeners, and they tell us under an hour is great, a half hour is wonderful, but somewhere between a half hour and an hour is also best. And then for our capturing and promotion, we always have to stay under that 55-minute mark, because we do have all kinds of reasons that fits into today's programming. So anyway, what's your number one? Let's go to number one.
Well, let's drop back a bit, and I would just share some thoughts with people who maybe haven't been to all these exotic places. And that is you sort of divide up the attractions of these places. First you have the nature places, where there's a spectacular nature. And that's very different from places that have fascinating culture. And a lot of these countries have incredibly colorful, interesting cultural, and there's the high culture, which is the museums and the palaces and, things like that. And then there's the indigenous culture, the people living out in these villages. You can go sit and talk to them, and like I sent you that picture of the woman with the long neck. I mean, there's,
Right.
in Myanmar, I mean, there's all this, incredible different stuff. And I think a lot of people, when they think of a country out there to go visit, they think that country has a culture and a language. For example, India, they speak what? Indian, right? Or Hindi. But in fact, there's 839 languages they speak.
Wow.
Or sorry, India has 22 official languages. 22 official. You cross the state into another Indian state, and the billboards are in different language, and you're moving into the dress, the economies, the language, the culture. It's totally different. It's like going to another country, And I did a little research on it. The Papua New Guinea is the most extreme in the world. They have 839 languages in a really small country,
Wow.
And Bolivia has 22 languages. And so these countries you go to, you quickly learn that it isn't a country, it's a whole subdivision. We're 50 states, that's confusing enough, but imagine we talk 50 languages and 50 different dresses and all that. So that's one of the first things that when you're fixing to go somewhere that you encounter. California, when the first people arrived, the Spanish arrived here for the first time in 1769, there was 68 languages. And some of them were like, language family, 54 language families, drastically different, because California, as we've talked about, is a land of these extremes. And the kinds of game and things to eat and vegetation is drastically different from one little place to the next, requiring different technologies and therefore different cultures. And so they all lived separate from each other. And it fostered that huge diversity. But it's in Europe. I mean, there's hundreds of, I guess, 238 languages in Europe.
Hmm.
And, it's a different world. So that's one of the first things to think about when you're going someplace, is that you're not going to just encounter a culture. You're going to encounter a whole bunch of them, and
Well, here in our own, I went to a lecture, it was about 6, 8 months ago up in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, professor, happened to be Mennonite, great guy, gave a lecture on all the German, as German folks came from Pennsylvania, migrated to Wisconsin. You would think, well, that would be a pretty uniform migration. And he had all of this map just in Wisconsin, how very different all those German communities are. As you said last week, Freeport is a German Polish,
yes,
community. Wisconsin, it was just amazing to hear him talk about his own religion, which is it was very interesting. I learned a lot from that. But my own granddaughter this past Sunday, they're, for whatever reason, at the age of 11, her and her brother decided, let's go on Duolingo and learn German. And we're sitting and having Sunday donuts and coffee 2 days ago or 3 days ago, and she said, "Grampy, we know you took German in high school. Was it low German or high German?" It was the last question I thought my granddaughter was going to be asking me. It's like, well, it was high German, and I was like, from Duolingo. I mean, they went down, what that meant. So that is fascinating that a country could have, well, even California, as you said, how many, different
there's
derivations of language.
68 languages. But, even in England, we think of England, people, they were all the English, but you have the Welsh who spoke Welsh, and then in the northern part, you had the Irish, and then you had the Scottish. And even in England itself, there's this huge the accents are different. Same as here,
Well, I had a
people,
cab ride from the airport to Grosvenor House, I think it was, in London, by a Cockney cabbie. still today, I need a translator. Don't have a clue what he was talking about. Have no clue. All we did, we got in and we shook our head, and he was talking
Even in
Cockney.
New York City, you have the different ethnic,
Yeah.
different kinds of accents. So the world is a very diverse place. And one of the first, premises you go traveling is that, it's not just this one thing. You be sensitive to that, I mean, there's a difference in culture. I know from growing up in North Carolina that it's a very, very different culture than South Carolina.
Yeah.
And it was so different that when General Sherman's troops were coming up from South Carolina, they stopped raping and pillaging and burning when they got to the North Carolina border because they saw it was a different culture, especially in the area in the middle there. And so anyway, I think that's that's one of the first the first premises of travel that's fascinating about that. And and I encourage people, if you're going to go off and this is to get yourself a laminated map. You make it, and on the cover side, the first side, you have a map of the world, and you can show that to people. When you get out of the big cities and away from the hotels, a lot of people don't speak English, and if you don't have a guide, you're so you could hold this up, and they universally throughout the world they'll nod and yeah, I get it, I know what that is, and you flip it over, and why it's there. You can point to wherever you're from, Wisconsin or California or wherever, and you can point yourself and say, here, they will nod, they will get it no matter where they are. I mean, out in the jungles, they'll get it. And then you flip it around, and that's their country, and you point that, and you point to them, and you say here and that, and then they get that. And you've just told them where you're from and where they're from, and how it all. And right off the bat, you got a converse icebreaker. And people will start talking to you about stuff. And,
Yeah, and you remember this can be a boomer throwback just for a minute. One of my most cherished times when we traveled, well, taking my kids, even in the 80s, was planning our trip and then, somehow going to AAA and say, here's our trip, car trip. Please give us a folder of what we need. And they put together these amazing travel folders with maps, and they'd line it out and highlight it out and put in stops. Did you ever do that yourself with your kids, or is that something?
Well, when I went to South America, I found out there's guides, and so there's this outfit in Palm Beach, Florida, and they will do for pilots. They will do these international trips, and so we went to them, myself and three other couples with our airplanes. We're going to fly all the way around South America, all the capitals, all the way around, and we hired them. And they sent a guide with us. One of the guys was single from New York, and so he flew with him. And this guy could speak Portuguese, Spanish, English, and French.
Wow.
And so he went with us, but they made us these big, thick things, and they had brochures on every country, every city. They had tickets to everything. They had guides waiting for us on a limousine, pick us up and take us to all these places. So they had it all figured out for us, and they also had flight plans. They file the flight plans with the local. So all we had to do was go out and get in our airplanes and pick up thing and say, I want my clearance, and they would read it to you, and you already had it, and you put it in your computer, in your autopilot, and it would just fly you there. And so they work on all kinds of levels. I mean, if you're going not flying, if you're going to fly there yourself in a commercial airline, they can do that for you to extraordinary levels of detail, including having guides. When we went to Myanmar and Namibia and these places, I mean, we had guides that had PhDs and from Cambridge that could speak the native language. And I go in these mud huts and 250 miles from the nearest village, and we're out in nowhere, and this guy's speaking to the and I go in with the chief of the village there, go into his hut and sit down with him in his hut and have an hour conversation with him.
Cool.
You're the translator, and that enriches the whole thing immensely. And the other thing I'd say is this, and a little bias on my part here, is that most big cities in the world have free or very inexpensive guide services, mostly volunteer. There's a volunteer group like the one I'm a member of in San Francisco called San Francisco City Guides, all volunteers, 350 50 people who know all about the local culture, 110 different tours, whatever you want. We got that tour with a volunteer who takes a group of people around for an hour, hour and a half, and tells them all about some neighborhood or the Golden Gate Bridge or the Golden Gate Park, American history, Gold Rush, whatever. And that is an incredibly enriching, inexpensive way to learn about a local culture. They have them in New York, they have them in London, they have them in Paris, they have all over the world. You can look that up and go on these tours. They're very interesting. Some of them are free. And learn more that you're just stumbling around with your map. It's not the way to do it.
Well, and again, I'm going to have you digress back to, I've asked this a couple times, and I talk to people and we're not on the show, but I know, the history of sailing ships being buried in San Francisco,
Yes.
the foundation and how they went down. I want you just to share that.
Now,
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, it's just such a fascinating story. You can't tell it enough times because it's just remarkable.
it's a story like no other story. And what happened is that the president of the United States, they discovered gold and spread all over it. It was a lot of gold. There was $18 billion in 2012 dollars. It was just picked up in the first 3 or 4 years in the creeks. Now, $18 billion among the very small, people made $6 to $8 a month in those days. And so it spread all over the world. And the president of the United States, decided James Knoxville, very popular. And what's he going to say about this? Because there's been people talking about gold since, civilization, and it was usually a hoax, or it wasn't that. So he gets up in front of the joint session of Congress in December 1848. And he says, gold was discovered in January. It took that long to work in on it. And he gets up and says, these reports of the discovery of gold scarcely command belief. Were they not all verified by officers in the public service? Which was 19th century for it's all true. This was a nuclear explosion. It spread all over the world. And within 30 days, you could not charter a ship in the world. Every ship on earth was headed to San Francisco. In January, there was 100,000 people on ships going to San Francisco, and there was nothing there. I mean, there was nothing there. And this is the biggest peacetime migration history of the world. Nothing like this had ever happened before. And so all these ships from all over the world, there's 747s a day with 200 tons of cargo, they pour into the San Francisco Bay. And they go into this little cove called Yerba Buena Cove, where San Francisco was. Yerba Buena means good herb in Spanish, from a tea that grew on the hills and Native Americans drank. And they all parked there. And the captains and the crews of these ships were paid a pittance. It was barely room and board, and it was not good room and board. And so they listened, go all the way around Cape Horn, coming from the east and all the way across the Pacific Ocean. When they got to San Francisco Bay, they saw people standing on the docks with sacks of gold trying to go home. Oh my God, it's true. And so they universally, captains and crew alike, abandoned these big, huge ships. Thousands of them in the bay. I got pictures I think I showed you, of just looking and just seeing a forest of these masts of these ships sitting there in the bay. They were wooden ships. They'd been around Cape Horn across it. They were leaking, and they were abandoned. They were full of valuable cargo. Now, it would have taken 20 men or 50 men a month unloaded, because you have to go all the way down 18 feet in the hole and get donkeys or horses and pull it up, on hoists to put it on deck and lower it into, paddle it. They just left it there. It was they abandoned all this cargo, and it was all kinds of. One of them, the earliest ship that arrived in Niantic, had cases and cases and cases of French champagne from the 1840s. And so all these ships were abandoned. They slowly sank into the bay, and then people went out because firewood was saws and cut off all the masts. And then suddenly you have the city with this harbor's blocked. The sewage and the animals and dead guard went into this, and they needed money, and there was 80-foot high sand dunes all the way around what's now San Francisco. You can't have a city with 80-foot high sand dunes. So the city fathers got together in a saloon, which is where they did all their business, and they said, "What are we going to do now?" And so somebody said, "I know what let's do. Let's sell it, the bay." the cove, Verbalina Cove. So they brought in these, surveyors, and they brought in big long sticks and stuck it down in the mud and tied ropes, and they made water lots of the whole cove, square mile plus, it's a mile and a half square, and they auctioned it off and sold it just like that for a fast fortune. And the deal was you had 2 years, so you had to fill it in yourself. You bought it; they weren't going to do it for you. So people got to hire somebody to get in a little canoe and paddle it out and dump it into the bay. And then when you're ready, you call the city guy, I'm ready. You come out with a horse, and the horse would stand on your lot. And if his shoes were dry, the hooves were dry at high tide, here's your deed.
Wow.
And so they filled in the whole thing. And so one of the things, of course, was the Niantic. And so they built a great big famous building on top of that ship, and it was called the Montgomery Block Building, built by this famous first lawyer there, William Henry Halleck, who went on to become the head of the Union Army in the Civil War. And he built this great big huge 4-story beautiful office building, and called the Montgomery Block Building, and the locals call it the Monkey Block Building. And to make it, what they did is they made a float. Back in those days, they didn't, have, and so they would took huge redwood logs and laid them this way, and then this way, and then this way, after built it like a raft and set the building on top of it, and it worked. And they built it like that. And guess what was underneath it? The Niantic.
Amazing.
For champagne, and it was, the city burned down. When the Niantic arrived, the captains of the crew, it was the captain and his 2 sons, and somebody paddles out, says, the captain will buy that ship from you from a pittance, and you and your sons will go back to Massachusetts, where you came from. He said, I'll take it. They said, we'll go out, run up the sails, wait the high tide, and run it aground and claim like the center of what's now the Financial Insurance School. They did that. They turned it to warehouse and hotel. It burned to the water line, but the champagne was way down underneath that. And so they built it back, called it the Niantic brand. That burned down, and then pretty soon, then they built this Montgomery Block Building on top of that. And the Shishi neighborhoods move around. This Shishi neighborhood moved south of Market, the rents went way down, and so it was rented by artists and sculptors and playwrights. And 1,000 famous people. Sun Yat-sen, who overthrew this Ming Dynasty in China, he had an office there, an inexpensive office. He plotted the overthrow and the creating the Republic of China in that building. And so it was a very famous place of artists and everything until about the 1970s, when the neighborhoods came back and the prices went back up, and the owners decided to tear down the Monkey Block Building. There's a great book written about it by Jasmine Darsnik, who she's an Iranian-born author who recently had three books on the New York Times bestseller list at the same time. And one of them was called The Bohemians. And it was about the people who worked in that office, mostly women, in the 1920s. And it is an utterly fascinating book. I read it. She came to our house and talked to my wife's culture club about that book. And it was just an incredibly interesting book. So 1950s come, the 1960s, and the neighborhoods rent goes back up. Now it's now 100 years old, more than 100 years old. The thing was built in 1854. I mean, it said it was the biggest office building in Western Chicago. It was the only office building in Western Chicago.
There you go.
So they decided to tear it down and build some gigantic tower there. And they fought over how high it was going to be, not building the Transamerica Pyramid on top of it. And they knew the first question that the tenants are going to ask is this thing going to fall on me when the shape comes? Because, earthquakes. So they went down to China, they said, but they went down 100 feet to bedrock. And what do you suppose they found? And they found the Niantic. There it was. And they cut it in half. And there was all these cases and cases and cases and cases of French champagne from the 1840s. And the temperature down there was about 53 degrees Fahrenheit, which is exactly the temperature in your wine cellar, Rainey, where you keep your French wine from the 19th century.
Of course.
you know, it was perfectly preserved. I mean, we're a big wine snob area out here, you know. And so they decide what they're going to do with it. They're going to auction it to charity because it was down there. It was arguably public and it land and you know. So the title was so they said, all right, we'll sell it for we'll auction it to charity. So they auctioned off. You go online and see auctioned off these bottles of French champagne from the 1840s, and they got $250,000 for every single bottle of it, and all went
Not per bottle.
per bottle,
Really?
per bottle. This is a wine, a wealthy place.
Wow.
They auctioned up per bottle. They got $250,000 for all
Wow.
these cases and cases of champagne. They sectioned off, and so my wife went to. There was a San Francisco lawyer who came. I went to Martha's Vineyard, where the captain of the ship that was underneath, you know, where his ancestral home was, and it was called the Cleveland. Like his name was Henry Cleveland, Cleavland, and it was one of the people we went to high school with. Was one of his great granddaughters.
Huh.
There was a Cleveland in our. It was amazing, and so. This lawyer went there and sees this picture on the wall. It's painted in Canton, China, 1830, and it was the Niantic, the ship that was buried under the thing. There it was. He said, "Isn't that the Niantic?" And they said, "Yes, that's my great grandfather's ship."
Wow.
And so they sent out. We had an archaeologist on the payroll, still do, and they went out to Martha's Vineyard, said, "What do you want for that?" And she said, "Well, I don't want any money for it, but I want a replica. They can't tell them, experts can't tell them apart. And I want a big piece of wood from the 90 to put on my wall. And I want a bottle of that champagne." You know, they said, they gave it to you. Can't make this. It's too good.
Yeah.
And so so my wife, you know, is there, and she decides to go. And I say, "Look, I give this tour, and people from all over the world come on this tour. You go knock on that door, see what happens." So she goes, she knocks on the door of the Cleveland house, and who answers the door but Henry Cleveland, the captain of the ship that was under the, you know, herself. And my wife says, "Can we have a picture?" She gets a picture. I have a picture of the whole thing. And so this woman, Cynthia Riggs, Riggs, she's a famous fiction writer. She's just adored on all of Martha's Vineyard. And she's great, and she writes murder mysteries, okay? And she's also a member of the Moth. The Moth is this worldwide storyteller. Have you ever heard of it? And they have these story slams all over the world. People come in and they tell stories. They have to be true as affirmed by the teller. And so you can go online and listen to them. They're quite fascinating. So she is a member of the Moth, and she goes on to the Moth there in Martha's Vineyard and tells the story about how she went on an expedition to Antarctica when she was 18. And on this expedition to Antarctica, a scientific expedition, was this older man. He was like 21. And they have this torrid thing, you know, and they've fallen deeply in love. And then when they get back, he's at Scripps in San Diego and she's in Boston. Okay, so it went the way of these young romances. And after a lot of fervent exchanges of emails, they finally lost track. And she married somebody, he married somebody. And then, 61 years pass. 61 years pass. And one day she goes to the mailbox, and there's this big envelope in the mailbox. And so she takes this envelope back and she puts it on, opens it up, and it's from him. And inside all these letters they exchanged 61 years ago. And on the top is one from him, and she opens it up and her hands are trembling, and it says, "I have never stopped loving you."
Oh, whoa.
And her husband has died. His wife has died. She writes to him and she says, come and visit me.
Wow.
So he comes to Martha's Vineyard. And you know where the story's going. Now they fall in love again. They're already in love. They move and they get married. And all Martha's Vineyard, because she's incredibly famous and popular and beloved there. She's kind of the mascot. The whole community comes out to celebrate her marriage. And it's an amazing thing. Is when my wife is there, she meets this guy, 61 years, Randy. So he since sadly has passed. But it's it's a story that you can't make. It's just doing so.
So we've gone again with Robert Mills. I mean, I love listening to you because we've gone from asking a simple question about the schooners supporting the Transamerica Tower, finding the. I love that story. I mean, I've heard it twice before, and I just think it's a remarkable story. To me, it sounds like at the end of it, it's a Hallmark movie. I mean, it's a
Yes, it's a very American story, and it's a
yeah,
very
10-part series on PBS or something. It just, it's just it's a remarkable story about our culture and our history. So thank you for doing that. I love listening to that story, and you're so full of the detail because I know you've wrapped your head around being a guide out there and did all this research to make be well versed when people ask you. But that story is just so remarkable. I'll ask people, hey, what do you think's buried under the Transamerica Tower? And they're going like, Jimmy Hoffa? I go, no, I'm not right there. But it's always interesting. But let's digress back into what we came to talk about. And
okay.
that was about your favorite places worldwide. Now you gave me 6, and we have about 25 minutes left, but that half hour was really well. So what I did is that I got a list, so I'm gonna, if these are just fast thought items when you while you capture your breath, let's say, from that storytelling. So I asked, quite honestly, I went into AI, I love it. And I basically said, what's of your list of countries that you visited, which country was the most desired by world travelers? And I just asked of your list to have it ranked from top to bottom. And what's the country that you wanted to talk about? First of all, was it Bolivia?
Well, Bhutan and Bolivia and and Morocco and Namibia are because those are the ones my wife liked because they're wild and out way off the beaten path. And you go out into the hinterland there,
Right.
and you're going back 10 centuries. You're going back to the Stone. I mean, and you meet these people there, and you can have this interactions with them, and it's really. It's just and they're sweet and they stare at you like you must be aliens from outer space, and so it is an incredible experience, and we talked last time about those girls singing the Colonel Bogey March. I mean, it was just, and I've had similar experiences all over the world in dozens of countries where you get off the beaten path out into the hinterland and and talk to people, local people who have never seen an American. In fact, most of them never seen a foreigner before. If you get way out, and they are just transfixed, and it's a very pleasant and enjoyable kind of interchange to have and experience with people and answer their questions, and then ask a few of our own,
Well,
But
I think it's different when people travel. I think 90% of the travelers today are looking for a mint on their pillow at the end of the night and a nice hot tub and, to be safe and secure and do the standard things. But just out of curiosity, just so you know, the most desired by world travelers at the bottom of the list, Bolivia and Bhutan.
they're
So
least or most,
the least,
the least.
the least.
Well, I mean,
But
the reason.
it's the experience. I'm saying your experience, you're well traveled, you're both well versed, you're looking for a different experience. And that's why we have you, here is to tell us about those different experiences to expand people's horizons, than going to
In Bolivia, I have to say, the capital of Bolivia, La Paz, is at 13,000 feet.
wow.
And you go to some of the towns where we went, we were at 14.5. And, we couldn't sleep at night because of the oxygen thing,
Right.
And it was, just walking is straight, and so you can't eat anything and hold it. I mean, so there is a lot, and it's cold and in the summertime. And so, there is hardships in some of these places. And, Bhutan is largely without roads. Namibia was largely without roads, and Myanmar, I'm sorry, and Namibia is not so much, but I mean, you're out in there's hardships there. There's no roads. There's no men on the pillow. There's no place to stay. We stayed in thatched huts and stuff. And so I can understand a lot of people that's a little more than my wife knows that I love to go off and into the colds and the wilds and camp in the mountains and this in the snow. And she says I want them to have room service after midnight in a marble jacuzzi.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, I agree with that, that function. Again, we also talk about sustainability. We we found out in a little advertising for what we do with our global eco travel eco certification. We found out through our research that 70% of travelers today, minimum, sometimes people say almost over 90%, are looking for sustainable travel options, but they don't know where to find them. And I just found an article in Sustainability Magazine this past week that said exactly that, is that the places that are sustainable have to get that word out. Now, to circle back, when you go to Bhutan and Bolivia, it says, known for unique approach to tourism, this is Bhutan, focusing on sustainability and cultural preservation. That was the definition.
On that, Bhutan rejected the idea of gross domestic product. They refused it. They said, we don't want to have gross domestic happiness. And they have a measure, and they have all these criteria, and they pursue gross domestic happiness is their, instead of gross domestic product. It's really quite a remarkable thing. We were there when they had their first election, and the king was a Stanford graduate, and I had friends who went to Stanford. They were professors, and they met him, and he got out of his car and talked to them for an hour, and he abdicated because he said it's time for us to have a democracy here in Bhutan. And the Bhutanese said, no, we don't. We want you to be the king. We don't want. But so they had an election. I think it was 2007, and these Bhutan didn't have any connections to roads, and these communities were hours and hours on a yak over some pass. So how are you going to have an election in a place like that? Well, they had it by internet. They went in, they got people with and they had an internet election, and we in California were still screwing around with paper ballots in. They pulled it off, the first country in the world to do an internet election.
Amazing.
This king is a very benign guy, and I think he married 3 sisters, and everybody jokes about with the kinds of jealousies that I might. But he's a very interesting guy, and he went to Stanford. I mean, so and he's very progressive, and he's trying to pull, and he's very, very big, Randy, on sustainability. That's one of his.
Well, yeah, at that point, taking a notice. Okay, so again, the little research I was doing, just this define sustainability. Sometimes people that need a little definition. Sustainability in tourism encompasses environmental conservation, cultural preservation, and economic benefits to the local communities. Among those leading countries, number 1 is Bhutan. There you go.
They're big on it. They're really, and they live a very sustainable lifestyle. I mean, they have these beautiful homes. This livestock is on the first floor, and then they live up. And they're beautiful homes. I mean, they were made hundreds of years ago, and they have this beautiful dress, and they're very peaceful. They're Buddhist. They've been Buddhist for 1,200 years, and they had this community there for over 4,000 years. Extremely peaceful, and they're extremely friendly. They just come up to you and talk to you, and a lot of these wild places out there, the people, I remember in India, I would be out in the boondocks of India and countries in states in India, and people would come up to me, fathers with their sons, and say, will you please take a picture of me?
That's
and I would take a picture and I would show it to them, and they would just awestruck. I couldn't send it to them via email because they didn't have. But
so I flunked my 4th grade geography. Okay, so tell me how you get from San Francisco to Bhutan. Which way around the world do you go? Do you go west or east?
We went east, and we went to Europe, probably to Amsterdam, I think. And then from there we flew to India, to Delhi. And then there's a flight from Delhi to the capital of Bhutan. And it's a long ways.
Yeah.
Namibia was the farthest place I've ever been to. I mean, you had to go to from uh, Europe. I went from Amsterdam to Johannesburg, which is like a 2 hour flight, and then down to Cape Town, and then over to Windhoek, which is the capital of Bhutan, and then get in two little Cessnas and fly 4 hours and refuel with tanks on the sand, and then go on. So that was a couple of days.
Wow.
To get out there and stay on the Willamette River with the crocodiles between Namibia and Angola. But it was, and my wife has this personality where she really relates to these local, and she talks to them, and she comes and she communicates this human thing, and they get it. And so while we were there, she talked and talked to them, and they kept coming and visit her, and she encouraged it. So finally, they discovered I'd taken her there for her 60th birthday.
Wow.
And so I don't know how they did this, being that you're 260 miles from the nearest village. They found some way to make her a chocolate birthday cake.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
we came down to this little thatch where we ate, and they all came in and surrounded her and sang happy birthday in the click language.
Wow.
It was one of those cultural experiences of the heart that, they were just looking at her, and they were, trying to pay back what they felt from her was this accepting, loving, human contact, and there we there we were in this thatched thing on this river that, and they're singing happy birthday in the click language.
It's
So
incredible.
I had a guide take us later for our 60th birthday to take us up on a 3,000-foot high sand dune, right on the top, with a Land Rover, towed a Land Rover, and put up a card table and put white linen on it and champagne and birthday cake, and I gave her the card and saying happy birthday to her on the top of this sand dune. When you look out and see nothing but sand dunes as far as the eye could see,
Wow.
and this vast desert there, and on the coast, and that was her 60th birthday.
I find it remarkable, people around the world. My experience that I had, not that magnitude, but we went to France after there was a blizzard that hit. We were in Germany, and then we were supposed to go to Switzerland. 26 inches of snow. We barely got out of Salzburg, got back to Munich, and I'm listening on the radio with my broken German. I'm going, I think we better get in the car and start heading west, or southwest, whatever, to get, because we were supposed to go to Paris. Anyway, now our plans are broken, and now we're wandering around, get into near Paris, out by Palace at Versailles. The girls in the back are using their photos, trying to figure out, it's like felt like Apollo 13, sort of, it's we didn't have to call the home office, but we ended up in a little village, a little city in a little basic, I don't know if you call it a bed and breakfast, but it was mom and dad that ran the food in the morning. We hadn't, back then before cell phones, we hadn't talked to the kids, and the kids are a couple days going to be flying with my dad we're going to meet up in London. So I was trying to get a little frantic. I told them I was going to call home. So the people there that owned it said, well, here, use our phone, call home. Didn't want to be paid for what I know had to be an expensive phone call. They inadvertently heard me say German food was heavy. All I really wanted was some bacon and eggs someplace when we get to wherever. And the next morning when we get up, I mean, it was a spread of bacon and eggs and rolls and French this and that and fresh bread and whatever. Didn't ask for, there's no menu. They just, they laid it out there to make us happy. And I mean, it was, if I ever make it back to France, I have to go down and find that village again, because we had the most iconic pictures we took in the trip, the best people. And it was their warm heart that, that people just
That's
open
one of the
up.
great the great treasures of international travel is that you can have those experiences, those human touching experiences with some stranger, thousands and thousands of miles away, who, wants to sing happy birthday or make you a bacon and eggs breakfast, because you're a human being, and from some faraway place, and they want to have that connection with you. They want to do something with you, and that's to be open to those experiences and have them in these exotic places, or it can be in France, or it can be in Europe. It can be, it can be in Southern California, but
Yeah.
um, that's one of the great, being open to that, and putting yourself in a place where that can happen is one of the great joys and treasured experiences of travel, and why people travel.
Well, and again, that's why honestly, how the essence of our sister company that we have called Global Eco Traveling, I was watching Anthony Bourdain on a Sunday night, and I was like, I'd like to be I'd like to be that guy. I like to tell those stories and meet the people, not in the way Anthony Bourdain did, but going around the world and watching all of his interactions with people. And I wanted to have a show where maybe particularly I might drink not as much vodka, that he was always alluding. He would sit down and tip over a lot of shot glasses sometimes in a few of the shows. But I really enjoyed his shows, respected him in his life, and I really wanted to do it in a different way. And after our 14 years of exploring it, we one day, I was quite honestly 3 years ago down at we have a golf show that we do called where we play golf eco style. And I was down at the FedEx Cup, the last tournament of the year. And we had invited down there by FedEx, and we had a nice spread of food. And I'm going through line to get this food. And this young lady says, "So what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm a podcaster, we feature eco-minded travel." And she says, "Well, what do you feature?" And I go, "Well, travel, dining, sipping, recreation, health, fashion, spas." And she goes, "Oh, all the good things in life." And I go, "Yeah, yeah." And here's $10 because I'm going to copyright that, and I'm going to give you credit because that is our tagline, and that's what the all the good things in life. People sometimes say to me, it's a little arrogant when you put those definitions down there. All those really are definitions that, of course, it's like this show. Let's talk about Robert's top 10 places, and we talk about one, which is fine. But when we talk about dining, sipping, recreation, golf, fashion, travel, all that, is it basically, we want to encourage, the good side of life, because there's a lot of, particularly in the world today, you turn on the TV and you get shattered by what's going on, in some ways, and and it's a little harsh. So what we try to do is give people a little bit of a relief, from that, and that you can go and explore. And to have you bring your stories from around the world, remarkable. I mean, your wife has got to be a remarkable woman that, obviously with her personality, engaging, and when you talk about, at a place where you can't breathe, you can't sleep, you can't do this, you can't do that. And oh boy, we had a great trip. That's like,
I have these Kevlar oxygen bottles,
yeah.
and I have a little thing that spin, and you put it over your head with a little, but you can't take them full on the plane, and so I had to take them empty. And when I got to La Paz, there was a huge riot going on and strike. And so the place that would fill them up was closed. I couldn't get in there with all this rioting and stuff going on, blocking the highways. So I never was able to, I think I could have eased things up if I take my oxygen thing out. I took my oxygen thing and put it over my head and got on my bicycle in California. And I rode that bicycle to the top of White Mountain Peak, which is the third highest mountain in the state. It's 14,242 feet high. And I rode it up, so rode to the top, and there was a research station up there from UC Berkeley, and a little teeny tiny hut there. And so I rode the bike, you put it in low gear and grandied up there with the oxygen thing going full blast, and it was like doing it at sea level because I had this up on oxygen. But it was not a very unpleasant experience for us there from that standpoint. but the place was so utterly fascinating. I mean,
Oh,
at night there in that town, everybody came out and they walked around this plaza, which was in front of our hotel. It was a square plaza, big, like a block each side. The whole town came out and walked around and around, And at first I thought it was some long march, and I realized I see the same people coming around, and they all their native costumes, these colorful native costumes, and it was just the whole thing was an incredible. And I went up to these mines. It was Potosi is the mine there. It was the most prolific mine in the history of the world by far over any mine on earth. This was gold and silver, mostly silver. And I went up and went into that mine. It ran out in the early 1900s, 1800s. And when it ran out, Spain just collapsed because it was getting its gold from, it's supported. Spain was supported by this mine and Zapotagas in Mexico and looting the cultures of South America, all of which went out right. I mean, just bam, they were gone. And so Spain collapsed. Napoleon invaded and conquered it, put his brother on the Spanish throne, and that caused a riot in California. And that's why California became Mexico. There was him not paying taxes. That guy's French. And so that is that, but it was, the altitude was an extreme thing, but it was just all part of this utterly fascinating. And I went up to the Potosi, the mine, and there were these starving, emaciated teenagers in the mine illegally trying to get little pieces of ore they could take down and sell for a few pennies in town, because that's how we're going to support themselves, because there's no jobs there. And that was a little heartbreaking, to go in there and see this in the mine. And in Potosi, there's asbestos in the rocks, so much that if you work in there for 30 days, it'll kill you. And
wow.
so they brought these people in and they worked in there and they died. And they kept going out, the Spanish kept going out further and further and further. And finally, they had to go over to Africa and bring slaves in to put them in there. They killed more people working in that mine than the Germans killed Jews in the Holocaust.
Wow.
Keeping that silver mine working. But I've been in it, and it's it's quite an experience to go there and experience
And
that.
you talk about native costume. The only not in your same culture. I was in Munich. We were in Munich for 3 or 4 days, and we went to this iconic Hofbrauhaus. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's about 8 stories tall. And basically, as they say in German, you go there to singen and dancen. It's there about beer drinking too, and it's where you go in and they bring out those big steins. It's
Yeah.
a class. It's a country club of drinking beer. Okay, so we go in there. I always wanted to go. And if you take German, one of the things you're learning German, they're gonna talk about the Hofbrauhaus. Well, my heritage is from that part of the world. So if you Google today Hofbrauhaus, you're gonna see Oompa bands, you're gonna see, 6 steins of beer being carried, by it's all warm beer, by the
Your
way.
pictures on the wall, right?
Yeah, they all look like
Your
me,
grandfather.
including the women. I mean, seriously, red-faced, reddish hair, bigger, and it's sort of funny. And the name Weckerle in Munich, spelled different, Weckerle, means same thing, wake early, actually, literally. And again, research I did, I'm digressing too much, but why my whole family and boys wake up at 3:30 in the morning is genetically been embedded in us, because 400, 500 years ago, our family was the family supposedly it's called Schweizer Deutsches. It's the German Swiss area. They were the family got up early to light up the lights in the streets. So they were called the Little Waker Uppers, and hence Weckerle. But anyway, we're in the Hofbrauhaus, and we're having a good time eating very heavy German food, Wiener Schnitzel and brats and hot dogs, and drinking too much beer. And native dress that we were looked at, of course, had to get the lederhosen, and the leggings and all that. That's one form. But the crowd was just getting crazy and rowdy, and it was just, we didn't know what was going on. So as we're walking back to our hotel about 4 blocks, we realized there was a soccer match in town, and it was Manchester United against whatever the Munich group was. And of course, football over there is passionate. And we're walking in the middle of the Manchester severely drunk and inebriated, toothless team, walking with us back to the same hotel. And it's like, we're going to be in the middle of a riot. I mean, there's no question about it. There were people, hostile, but nothing happened. But it was, their native dress was, being the soccer team, was very, very interesting to be walking among that culture. All I wanted to do was get back to my bed, and that heavy food that was in my stomach on the 5th floor, I told my wife at the time, I said, call down to the front desk because this bed is not going to hold me. And my stomach is going to go through this bed in the next 4 floors. I'm going to end up on the 1st floor because that food was beyond. And, being German, I've had that food in many times in my life, but never in the quantity of beer that was celebrated along with it. So quite a different, my stories are more along the, I don't know what on the edge of travel would be, certainly not on yours, but dealing with, you just run into things that you just can't. That's why I love travel. That's why we got into this business, Robert, is that we want to expose people to the world, and you do such a great job. And guess what? We've run out of time. So talking about next week, and I appreciate you coming back, we will, we've got quite a bit to explore, because there's also topics of, when we get into sustainability, but I love hearing your stories. I know you've got a million of them to share. Any highlights you want to focus on? Because I know we have no focus on these shows, but that's okay. I mean, what a great story today about the ships that hold up, the Transamerica Tower. I mean, it's just an iconic story, and all the stories of your wife. I really thank you for that. But should we give them a little peek at what we might do a week from today?
Well, we can talk about some of the native cultures that I would run into, and what they're like, what their dress is like, what their values are. We can talk about some of the history of those places. We can talk about some of the natural beauty that exists, the trees and the kinds of climate and at altitudes and so forth. And people forget the seasons are reversed in the southern hemisphere.
Right.
And so that there's great beauty down there that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. And we saw rhinoceroses and giraffes and cheetahs in Namibia, and we saw all kinds of native animals in southern Patagonia. We saw there's penguins there, and so we can talk about the wildlife, the physical beauty there, and more of these cultural experiences and one-on-ones that we had with various people we meet, and cultures that we meet there, and what it was like. And they would take us into their homes, and they would have conversations and stuff.
Well, Robert, we're bumping up against it again, and I hate to say it, but thank you again for being with us and the listeners today on Happy Hour Lifestyle Show. I just love spending the time listening to your stories. I wish I had more years in my life to have you lead me around the world on your adventures, but I live vicariously through your history. And anyway, Robert, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And
delightful as always.
Yeah, no, it is. It's delightful. And this is Randy Weckerly, and this is the Happy Hour Lifestyle Show, brought to you by Live Eco Style Inc. and Global Eco Traveling LLC and the Distillery Channel Media LLC. And all those companies come together to help you understand world travel and what my grandfather meant by when he said, try to leave a better footprint, because that's the way the good Lord wanted it. Anyway, so long. Talk to you next week.
Thank you. Take care.